Hey there, everybody. Thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Yesterday we take a look at My Favorite Thing is Monsters Book 1 and the brand newly released from Fantagraphics Favorite Thing is Monsters Book 2 by Emil Ferris just came out. I just got my copy in the mail, my pre-ordered copy. So I was really glad to have reason to go back and reread volume 1. You can go watch that video and see what I thought of it, and then immediately jump into volume 2 and kind of get the whole project all as one chunk. I think that this is just a 2-book project, but without doing any spoilers, I will say right out the gate that the ending left me feeling like there should be a 3rd book, but I don't think there's gonna be, and I'll talk about that a little more as we get there. Because this is a new book, I don't want to give too much spoilers. I don't want to dig into it too much, but I do want to dig in enough to give my thoughts on it. It starts out with a recap here on the inside front cover, which I think is really, really wise given how long it's been since book 1 came out. I pretty much did not remember much about it when I went into the reread. I definitely enjoyed it more than I remember enjoying it when it came out. I remember really enjoying the art, but not being too engaged by the story. I found the story much more engaging this time. But I think for people who don't have they just want to get on to reading this one, there's a nice little recap here, refreshes you about all the beautiful things that Emil Ferris can do with different color ballpoint pens, and just gets you really hyped to jump into the book. And then really you got like a title page and you jump right in. So I think that's pretty great. One of the questions I had when I was looking at volume 1 is that sometimes it looked like this is about what I would expect the density of line work would look like for someone who's drawing with ballpoint pens, and there were panels in there that felt like the density of the lines were so much finer that it seemed like they had been drawn very large and shrunk down. And I was questioning whether this was all actually drawn in notebooks or whether it was digitally composted. I still don't know the total answer to that question, but this image of the heart here and this image of the heart here are absolutely the exact same image. The density of the lines is smaller here and stuff, so I'm almost positive that this image here is this same image just shrunk down and like digitally collaged into this image here. So I don't know that she's doing that all the time. I don't think so, but I do think there is some digital composting. And I have to wonder about whether it was really in the line notebook that it looks like it's drawn in. I don't know that it really matters, but like there's this just something about it where I thought it was my memory is that it was being sold as like this was all actually drawn in these notebooks. So I could just be misremembering that, but I'm just curious about how it's made, because we're always curious about production stuff here. But this is the only instance I've seen where I can really identify, that's definitely digitally put in there. The thematics of the first book are definitely getting played out here more intensely. This idea of being a monster, being an outsider, being an other in society is just getting ramped up. I like this bit here that kind of reaffirms for the audience what the thesis of the book is. Perhaps a good monster is a person who makes the most thoughtful choice possible when there are no good options. And this is coming from the Anka character, who had to be engaged in prostitution and is trying to get this group of girls out of a concentration camp, but taking them into basically a brothel. Like, she's still doing a monstrous thing, selling these girls into sexual slavery, but she's saving their lives. She's taking them out of the concentration camps. So that kind of empathetic exploration of why people make the choices they make, I think, is one of the things I really, really enjoy about this book. But by the end of it, it's almost takes it a little too far, I felt. Like justifying all awful actions. I'm not sure. There's a funny part here where the main character, Karen, who's writing in these notebooks, who's supposedly doing these drawings, is having a dream about the Anka character, and she's like licking these flowers. It's obviously meant to be like oral sex, And then like she wakes up growling and licking the living room rug, which to me was just like a little bit heavy-handed rug muncher joke, but it was obviously intentional because the like next page her brother Dees comes in and is like, "Was your dream a lesbo thing?" So that was funny, but I felt a little heavy-handed. Another thing I started noticing pretty early on in the book is that one of the things I really enjoyed about the how the volume one stuff was put together or photographed is that the holes here were like you could see down in them and you would have shadows, and that was used to make things look more three-dimensional. In this one, the way that they're photographed or scanned or digitally put together or whatever, it's like they just scanned a solid sheet or they scanned it with black behind it instead of white, and so you don't get any of the depth of like the notebook hole, the hole punch. And to me, it's compositionally more distracting to have these big black dots everywhere. So, and it's just like when you look at the two books as like a total project, it's just a strange difference in something that seems like such a stock part of the format that there's a big change like that. So that jumped out at me as strange. Emil Ferris does a good job showing also like what a real monster is, a bad monster. So she has like this sequence where she's on the train with her mother, who's very religious, and they're seeing a lesbian couple. And this is like in the 60s, so her mom's obviously like not about it, but there's this other lady who's obviously just ugly, nasty person by the way she's being drawn, and she's just laying into these women even though it's none of her business. They're just out in public. And so like that's Karen seeing like, hey, there's good monsters. I want to be a good monster. I'm an other. I don't fit into the norm, but I don't want to be this unnecessarily cruel person. And that's like the main theme that runs throughout. A thing that Emil Ferris did a lot of in the first book and does a lot more of in this book that I love looking at, and B, every time I see her do it, I'm like, oh my God, that would be so much fun. I would love to do color ballpoint pen drawings like this of famous pieces of art. Is she's constantly having Karen and her brother Dees talking about and using famous paintings that they've seen at the Chicago Institute of Art Museum, using that as metaphors for what they're going through in their experiences and metaphors in their communication with one another, which is A, really smart, really cool writing, and B, it gives her an excuse to do these really, really awesome drawings that you could tell she just had an absolute blast making. So I'm glad to see there's a whole bunch of that in here, and I don't want to show them all, but just getting like the variety of them from the more classical paintings to seeing like some Toulouse-Lautrec. Also talking about like Toulouse-Lautrec as an outsider, as a freak. You know, he was like had dwarfism, and he was working with prostitutes and all of these things. So she's gravitating to him, and especially this one painting where he's showing two lesbian lovers in bed together, not in a sexual situation, but in a loving situation. And that's how Karen's thinking about it, like not this gross, crass, like just being a whore. It's just like, hey, I have a different sexual preference, but I still want like a romantic first relationship. And so she's exploring that as well, like the monstrous perception versus like the actual desires of someone that's in an other category compared to what society has historically put forth. Another feature that was part of volume one that I'm glad to see is back in equal parts in volume two are these covers. I still never figured out throughout the volumes if these are actual covers that of books that Karen is supposed to be reading this story, or if these are her designs. They definitely talk about the Mothman character, and her brother Dees is revealed as a comic artist in here, which I think is kind of a strange addition to it. But it makes sense because they're having conversations about art and comics and stuff all the time and monsters. So it may be also that she's copying covers her brother did, or that these are his drawings. One of the things that I said about the first volume that still remains as a criticism in this volume is I'm supposed to buy into the artifact nature of these notebooks that Karen Reyes is making, that these are her drawings and her writings, that this isn't Emil Ferris's artwork. It's supposed to be presented as these are the actual notebooks. And the writing and the art is far too sophisticated, even for someone her age who has a brother who's showing her how to do stuff. She'd have to be child prodigy level, and there's nothing in the story that suggests anyone is treating her as like, holy crap, like you're really good, or that they haven't seen this stuff and she's just quietly hiding her genius or something. So that is a bit of a big pill to swallow in terms of like what I have to accept the conceits of the book. So maybe this is her brother drawing. I'm not quite sure, but that's something that I just had to put aside in the book and see as a flaw of it that didn't matter so much compared to the rest of the beauty. This archival nature of these notebooks gets emphasized even more in this volume, I think, than in the first volume, where there are things that Karen hasn't made. Like this is a collage that someone else made that you can see has been like taped into the book. And they do a really good job, you know, whether this is all scans of a real book or whether it's digitally composted, it's very convincing that like this thing is taped into the book. So it's interesting to see her notebook take on a bit of a scrapbook collage quality to it in this volume. I think there's a little bit more of that, and to me that helps sell the illusion of the notebook a little bit better. But that, again, that's always balanced out by this is too virtuoso of a performance for a 10-year-old. Something else that doesn't bother me all the time, but some of the pages in volume 1 and volume 2 have very confusing reading orders of captions for me, and I was trying to find like a logic that Emil Ferris must have been using. Like my first thought was, okay, whatever's highest on the page, and you kind of just read it like this, rather than my temptation is to just like follow the line around. In some pages, it's better to read like this. In this page, though, that doesn't follow. The line of reading goes like you read this, then you read this, then you read this, then you jump down to here, then to here, then you jump to here, and then you read this and this. So instead of following a flow like this, it kind of goes like this, and it visually just doesn't like thread the needle for me. And there's a number of places where that happens. I think, you know, for the most part, Emil Ferris is coming up with a really fascinating like language of her own in comics, but at times she's operating so far out of the standard flow that she makes mistakes like that, I guess. So I think there's some areas that could be tightened up just purely formally. And then like on this page, I still never figured out if this is the first caption and then this one, or if I'm supposed to read this, then this, then this, then this. And so some pages I would just have to read it a couple different ways and put it together, which isn't the best thing. Love, again, the play anytime that the eyeballs can be used. This one is actually having it solid black makes sense. Having it be the little pigeon there. There are a couple points in the book where I don't know if it's just how they prepared the images for reproduction or if Emil switched over to a different pen, but like an image like this has a much crispier, I know this stuff probably doesn't show up on camera, but there's a crispness to the line work that looks like this was done with a nib pen. There's some slighter variation in line weight without getting fuzzy, like on the ballpoint pen, because it's actually leaving a lighter line as you press softer, not just a thinner line. There's a fuzzier quality to the way the line work shows up, and you can see it both in his hair and in the hatching. Like this page, you have pretty much the same face twice, and you can really see the textural difference between like a nib pen type of mark where it maintains the contrast and the sharpness of the pure black all the way through with some line weight changes versus the ballpoint pen where you're getting line weight and value variation changes as you go. You can see that in the hair too, where this hair gets lighter and this maintains a more overall gray. That's because even though the density of the line work is the same, this one is done on ballpoint pen and this one looks like it's done in a dip pen to me. So that's interesting. And it's really also really hard for me to imagine a dip pen being used on this notebook paper. And this looks digitally cut out and composted over top of this. There's a little bit less yellow, like everything seems a little bit more white. This has a little bit more color on it. So I don't know if this was something that got replaced later or whatever, but it's interesting to see her flipping over into a different tool and pretty much applying the exact same style and technique, but producing a slightly different look because of the difference in the tool. And again, it makes the kind of production of everything more interesting. There are definitely also some places in this book, like in the first one, but I feel like there's a little bit more in this one where the work gets looser. Sometimes there's narrative reasons for that, and sometimes it just seems like an emotional choice. But it is weird to see a page that's like so finely like hatched as this, and then you immediately jump to an image that's looser like this. That was something in the first volume I didn't quite understand, like the logic of when she chose to do what. This one seemed to have more narrative reason for it. Here's another one of these pages where there's a real bananas kind of like structure and how you're supposed to read it. So there's like a chain of thought that goes across here, and you read 1, 2, and then there's kind of like a follow-up 1A over here. But then you also really supposed to read 1, 2, 3, all the way down here, 4, 5, 6. So this is like a train of thought here that basically, like, this train of thought carries over this way, and this train of thought, even though you're kind of supposed to be like here sequentially, it takes its own like little path and then over to here, and then you kind of get 7, 8. So across the spread, I think it was a bit strange, and there's a little bit of like characters talking past each other as well. This is also all happening within like Karen, you can see here imagining this is all a big balloon. So this is like her commentary on what's going on. This is their actual conversation. This is like her kind of commentary going this way, but also this way. And then these are both things that she's imagining her brother saying rather than real things. So very interesting formal things being attempted, but I think it's just stretching a bit far and failing in places. There's like a lot of these conventions of comics that are being pushed to their limits, and I love watching that because when it lands, it's awesome, but in a few places it just doesn't land right. We also get introduced, we're pretty far into the second volume now. We're getting introduced to another really important person in the main character Karen's life. We meet Shelley, who's going to be kind of like her first love interest. From there, I don't want to give much more in terms of story. A lot of what I've been commenting on anyways is art and production, because I don't want to give away story spoilers. There's a couple more things I wanted to comment on in here. I really like this bit of dialogue, and again, I think it's like to the core thesis of the book. The brain, this character here with the afro, the brain told me that the best I could hope for is to love Dees by keeping his secrets and not putting too much pressure on him. The brain said that when somebody is in a dark place, the best thing you can do for them is to always try and remember their better, most beautiful, and kindest selves. And then you get this really big, you get a couple pages here of Karen having these memories of Dees at his best. And I don't want to go into all exactly what she's finding out about Dees that she needs to be compassionate to him about, but it's some pretty awful stuff, and she's learning to have to love him anyways. And I think that's a really great message. But then combined with a lot of the stuff about Nazis and the stuff about like women going into prostitution, like I get the empathetic, sympathetic side of like looking at like the situation that forces people into things. But by the time you get to the end of the book, it almost feels like it goes too far to me, where it's just like giving everyone a pass to do whatever they want, and that seems kind of strange to me. It seems like a strange like moral that the book ended on. Throughout the second volume, and I forget, maybe I wasn't paying attention to it in the first volume, there's a lot of like asides where Karen is like, but I'll write about that on a later time. Maybe I didn't notice it in the first volume because there was still a whole second volume to come. But as this volume continued to go and that mantra kept getting repeated, like I'll write about all of that at a later day, I started to get the feeling that like there's no way this is all going to get wrapped up by the end of the book. And that's my biggest complaint, is that by the end of this, I'm pretty sure the suggestion is that this is the end of the story, but Emil Ferris opens up a whole bunch of really interesting plot threads in Volume 2 that weren't even suggested in Volume 1. And the end of the story basically is like the beginning of. It seems like there needs to be a whole Volume 3 to see how all of this plans out. It plays out. And I think also the ambiguity and like the literal what happens next of the story leaves a. That's kind of where some of that moral ambiguity comes in for me, where I'm not quite sure what Emil Ferris is suggesting, because unlike a Shuzo Oshimi or an artist like that, you don't get to see the characters go on to heal from the damages, or become comfortable with themselves as outsiders truly. So I really feel like by the end of this book, even though the performance of the art, as you can tell by this page, and the general writing performance and everything throughout, if this is the end of the series, and maybe if I reread it a couple more times, I wouldn't feel the same, but my sensation at the end of the first reading is that this didn't wrap up the narrative threads in a way that was like I felt fully satisfied as a reader. And that can be fine for me as a reader. Like, if I don't get answered to all the plot threads, that's fine if like the thematics get wrapped up in a way like where I really feel like the author grappled with the problem and then came away with some kind of conclusion for it. But this feels so much like someone trying to make a statement, and then it's just never clear what their statement actually was. And it doesn't feel like someone who really grappled with all sides of something and then kind of left it at that, said, hey, here's where I've looked at everything and now it's up to your conclusion. Like, I feel like Emil Ferris has something she's trying to get across, and it didn't quite land for me what exactly she was trying to say by the end of the book. So it's like my take on My Favorite Thing Is Monsters as a totality, if it is only a 2-book project, which from everything I've seen, that was my assumption about it, is that it's absolutely a masterpiece that everyone should read. But like a lot of really great works, it definitely has its flaws, and the flaws can be the source of the discussion, I think, like the thematic stuff, like what was really trying to be said. But it doesn't feel like an intentional leaving open of the topic to generate discussion. It just feels to me like a little bit of an inability to stick the landing. I really just feel like I want a Volume 3. I feel like it needs a Volume 3. And that's speaking to how much I appreciate the work. Is it's so good and I'm so engaged with it. I just want to feel like the experience was completed, and I just don't feel that yet. I want to know more. I want to see more. I don't know. Like, this is a hell of a performance. These are big books, both volumes, and this is intense art. Like, this is risk-killing approach to making art, and the time between the 2 volumes suggests how much time it would take for a third. It's hard for me to even imagine Emil Ferris doing another major project. I could see her doing maybe shorter stuff, but it would be a hell of a thing to get a 3rd book out. And I don't know. Whatever Emil Ferris does next, I hope she does something else. I hope we can see her outside of this mode, like working outside of the notebook mode. What else can you do in comics? Like, what else can you say? You're obviously a powerful voice. So that's my, kind of how I feel at the end of it. Is just excited, hoping that this master of the medium does something else and gives us something else to round out the what that body of work is all about, whether it be a follow-up to this book, a 3rd volume, or something else that's like a tangential conversation with it or something. I don't know, but I hope we get to see more from Emil Ferris, because it's stunning comics.
standa heitir yggdrasill Hárbáð mareisinn hvíta ári Þaðan kom að öggva þær síðala falla stendur ei fígrætt urðarbrutni Ask veit ég standa